Hello, Kyle. What you see before you is a device specifically designed to get your opinion about the movie Glass from your different personalities.
I don't have different personalities. I thought it was fun. I'm only 9 years old, but I like it. Not as much as I like Drake, but it was fun. Boring, bland, pitiful, childish, inexcusable. Worst movie in the history of cinema. I just wasn't a fan. I thought it was okay. I can't sit here and act like it was the worst movie I've ever seen, but it also wasn't very good.
What about the Beast? Can we see the Beast?
Well, What is up, ladies and gentle dudes? Kyle here, and today we're going to be talking about Glass.
I've been waiting for the world to see that we exist. May I meet the Beast? I hope for your sake that he likes you. That sounds like the bad guys teaming up. A lot of people are going to die. Don't do this. Are you ready? What do we call you, sir? First name, Mr. Last name, Glass.
Yes, the sequel that everyone has been waiting for to Unbreakable and Split. This is a movie 20 years in the making, just about. Although, to be fair, it was not in the forefront of everyone's minds until a couple of years ago when Split came out. So, of course, this is the third part of the Shyamalan comic book movie trilogy, if you want to call it that. I don't know what you would classify this as. Part comic book movie, part psychological thriller. I'm going to be frank with you, there's going to be lots of negatives here. I'm not going to go into too many spoilers, though, because to get into the negatives on this movie, you really can't go without spoiling a lot of stuff. And if there's people out there that still want to see it, it's kind of difficult to do that. So, we're going to skip spoilers. It's going to be kind of short in that regard. First of all, I've got to say that I have to commend M. Night Shyamalan for attempting to do something like this. On the whole, though, I think that it would have been a lot more interesting if this movie came out 10 years ago, or, even closer to 15 years ago, back when comic book movies weren't really at the forefront of all of our pop culture. It just kind of feels largely bland because of that. But we're going to go ahead and get into the reasons why I dislike this movie.
Let's talk about editing.
The editing in this movie really, really drags it down. This film has a lot of pacing problems. It clocks in at about 2 hours and 10 minutes, which I think is a little bit longer than Split or Unbreakable. Not too much longer, but long enough that you feel it. And, 2 hours I think is a reasonable runtime, especially if you're going for something that is as massive as the concepts that M. Night Shyamalan is trying to introduce here. The problem is that the way that this is paced really is counterintuitive. Unbreakable was a very slow film. Split, not so much. There was a lot going on in that film. With Unbreakable, it was a slow burn, lots of character development for David Dunn. And with this film, it's not a whole lot of character development. It's a lot of technological jargon that's largely bullshit. I'll admit, the majority of the film does take place in the mental asylum where these three characters are being housed. I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's pretty obvious from the trailers. So if you're thinking that's going to be a romp through a city or something along those lines, it really isn't. So I think that is one of the key things to get out of the way. With this film, we don't really get anything substantially new about these characters. I mean, there's a couple of things that were interesting, but I feel like everything that M. Night Shyamalan had to say about David Dunn and Kevin, aka the Horde, was pretty much said with those first two movies. But the editing is what made it worse. It's choppy, it's disconnected, it lingers on shots far too long. There's lots of scenes of like orderlies and stuff, you know, just interacting with other people in the hospital, but we don't really get them established as characters, so it's just filler. And then when there's something interesting that pops up, they don't spend enough time with that. So that's one of the big problems. But I think one of the biggest problems with this film is the fight scenes. Everybody is excited for a showdown between the Unbreakable Man and the Horde. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but also it's in the trailers, so also not really. The movie opens with a fight scene between the two of them, pretty much, and it's really jarring. It's not even remotely impressive. Of course, you still got the Horde, the beast scattering on the walls and things like that. That's a cool effect, but they're really dragged down by a soundtrack that's just these ambient strings constantly, so it feels like it's building to a moment that never comes. So it looks like two men, you know, awkwardly jostling each other around and like just in a very awkward street brawl. I wouldn't even classify this as an action movie because these sequences are so drab and boring compared to most other things that we see in modern comic book films. You know, a lot of people criticize the Christopher Nolan Batman films for having some kind of rough fight choreography at times. This is like 30 steps below that. Just keep that in mind if you're curious about this film.
Writing.
There's some pretty solid character moments that expand on the things that we know about these characters, but there aren't enough to really satisfy fans of either of the previous films. It is not a good sequel to either of those films, and it doesn't really work as a standalone movie. You have to have seen both Unbreakable and Split to understand where this film is coming from. If you go in with fresh eyes, you're not going to have a clue what the fuck is happening. I don't have a problem with films just, you know, doing that from time to time. My issue is when it doesn't feel justified. A lot of the scenes in this film weren't justified, and a lot of the characters made kind of questionable decisions that were counter to the way that they acted in some of the other films. Also, the film is called Glass, and Mr. Glass is not the main character of this film. You could argue that Kevin is probably the character with the most prominent role. So if you're a Split fan, you know, it plays closer to a sequel to Split than anything else, which, you know, I wouldn't have had a problem with if it didn't have all the other issues. The ending of this film, there's not one ending. It goes back to a primary Shyamalan problem.
Let me tell you something. If
M. Night Shyamalan.
Jackson really wanted to blow me away with those
Comic book.
movies, he would have ended the third one on the logical closure point, not the 25 endings that followed.
This film does not have one ending. It has like 5 endings. Pretty much all of them are undeserved, and they're payoff for things that he just barely set up. The one reveal that I thought was kind of impressive comes at about the 45-minute mark, if you're paying attention and you have knowledge of the previous films, but he saves it until the very end. So if you're not paying attention, then he's like, oh, by the way, this. And so I'm sure there's a couple people that'd be like, oh shit, but if you're actually paying attention, you're like, okay, well, now I know. Why did you have to wait until the end to tell me this? This is pretty fucking obvious. There's an extended montage where 2 characters find out the same piece of information around the same general time, and if you still don't get it at that point, then maybe you'll be shocked at the end. Shyamalan just went too big with this. He wanted to do too much stuff, and it hurts the movie. He doesn't build to these payoffs, and they're just... He presents them, and he's like, oh, check this shit out. And you're like, okay, well, that's kind of cool, but like, there's not enough here for me to be stoked about these things or me to be shocked by these things. M. Night Shyamalan knew that he needed to add something in there, and he was just like, fuck, what do I do? He's like, okay, this, and this, and then we're out. Also, it opens it up for potential sequels, but if he's going to do a sequel, then he kind of has to go the Split route, where it's unexpected and you have no clue, which I think would be extremely difficult to pull off.
How do I look? Oh, acting.
One of the few things that I did enjoy about this film was the acting. The cast does not phone it in. The only times that their scenes are kind of questionable are due to the writing. It is not the cast's fault at all. Bruce Willis does a great job as David Dunn.
Joseph, don't take another sip of that water. I'll throw it in the trash.
Of course, Samuel L. Jackson is fantastic as Mr. Glass when he's in the movie.
Shit, Negro, that's all you had to say.
James McAvoy, still on point as the Horde. I think he does a fantastic job portraying all of those different personalities.
Sounds like Xavier. Go fuck yourself.
And there were a few moments that still, conjured up those feelings that Glass and Unbreakable had. I just watched those two films yesterday, and, there were a couple of hints, and I was like, okay, well, I could see where this could have been a great movie. It just never reaches the point that you want it to. Also, Sarah Paulson, her character is an interesting addition, but we don't get to learn enough about her to make her notable. I think that if the story was more about her character, and these other characters were kind of revolving around her, and she was our entry point into the story, I think it would have made this film a little bit more engaging, so that we have a little bit more meat on the bones. But in the end, it's just very flat.
Cinematography.
The cinematography is fine. I think that the psychiatric hospital was a very flat location. It's very sterile. It looks obviously budget. I'm sure that the budget on this movie was super low. There were some very beautiful lighting effects in this film, though, and there were some interesting ideas with the cinematography, but nothing as interesting as Unbreakable or Split in that regard. Unbreakable, they played a lot with camera angles where they would flip the camera upside down and things like that. This film, the most interesting thing it does is it has this motif of doing a close-up on a character's face and a steady cam rig attached to them, so they're kind of moving around. But if you've seen Requiem for a Dream, you've seen that shot before. What the fuck? It's a shot that's been used countless times. I would have liked to have seen more variety in the cinematography. It's really tough to get into much else about this film without getting into spoilers. If you're a fan of the previous two films and you go in with an open mind, you might enjoy it. Just don't expect it to be on the level of those. If you've seen Lady in the Water, I would say this film is essentially Lady in the Water, but worse and with superheroes instead of fairy tales as the basis. That's the best way to describe it, I think. So if you like those films, or you like Unbreakable and Split, and you're okay with seeing a kind of mediocre Shyamalan movie, then you'll like it. It's not as bad as The Happening. It's not as bad as After Earth or Last Airbender or even Signs. I know a lot of people like Signs. It does not hold up well. It's okay. I'm probably going to forget it very soon. I will say that I don't think it deserves the 30% that it got on Rotten Tomatoes. My score for the film would be a 5 out of 10. It's very average. It's certainly something that I think you could probably just wait to see on TV. I'm just disappointed. I guess that's what I would say. I'm not surprised at all about my disappointment, but I'm still disappointed. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in.
So that does it for my review for Glass. Did you see it? What did you think about it? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed the video. And be on the lookout because I've got some new content coming soon. Also, if you're on YouTube, I've got 2 other videos here for you to check out. And I look forward to hearing people's opinions. I don't know what else to say. I'm disappointed by this movie. So, that's it. Bye.